and it's an adventure, I think, to make them work on modern hardware. And we will learn about recovering a fourth retro game, Byte 1981. So, Rick.
All right. Good morning, everybody, and good morning from Chicago. I'm going to share my screen here. And Ulrich, how's my audio and video? Is everything good to go?
That's great. That's great. We see the entire screen with.
All right, then I can start the slideshow. I'll just do the hotkey here, Control F5, I believe, if it's going to let me do that. Let's see. Oh, maybe not. Where is I just lost it. The present button.
Is somewhere slideshow.
Okay, there we go.
That
Okay.
works.
All right, let's get it started. So, hi, everybody. I'm RICK-CARLINO. I consider myself a bit of a Forth amateur in the sense that, I'm very enthusiastic about Forth and its history. But I kind of got interested in Forth after its heyday. And so I've never been professionally paid to write Forth. I do more traditional languages during my day job, but love the language. I love the history. And so this, is something I love talking about. In the past, I've worked on things like a thing called FarmBot, which was a big open source hardware project, maybe one of the biggest open source hardware projects to date. And we were building agricultural robotics stuff. But these days, I'm working in the real estate sector at a company called Qualia Labs, where I'm doing mostly web stuff. And outside of work, aside from doing history, I also contribute to RetroForth, if anybody's familiar with that Forth environment. But today, what I'm going to be talking about is the game that you see right here, this screenshot. And it's a story about how a group of developers from Reddit, and that includes myself, we revived one of what some people claim to be the first ever real-time strategy game. So if you've played games like Dune or StarCraft or something like that, it was that kind of game, where you're commanding an army and, doing those sort of strategic decisions. And we also, in the process of doing this, helped maybe set straight some exaggerated historical claims that we weren't really able to find out until we actually pulled up the source code and got it running on GeForce. So the game debuted during a Byte magazine contest that was held in 1982. And the game won the contest. It was written by a gentleman in South Africa. I believe he was a professor. And he won the competition. And presumably it was meant to run on the Apple II. There's still a little bit of mystery behind this game. Myself and the other contributors that worked on it, we have some suspicions about what Forth system it was supposed to run on. But even today, we don't have 100% certainty. I believe, trying to remember the name of the Forth system, there was an Apple II Forth. I think it was called like Graphical Forth. It was a graphical Apple II Forth system, but we don't really know for sure. It's some Fig Forth derivative, most likely. And this project happened earlier in the year, so memory might be a little fuzzy. Probably won't do a Q&A, but if you do have questions, feel free to either email me or you can also raise an issue on the GitHub thread. Well, I guess we can see how time goes. So yeah, and before I start, I'd like to thank a couple folks, including Peter for organizing the meetup today. Also like to thank the original author. I've never been able to get a hold of them. I don't know if they're still around or not. And then zeitgame.net. He is a anonymous blogger that covers gaming history, and he is actually the person who contacted us to start this project. And then on the bottom of this slide, I've put the Reddit usernames of everybody that was involved with the project because, again, I was not the only person involved. There were a lot of people who were very helpful in getting this thing off the ground. All right, so let's start at the beginning of the story. So last year on the Forth Reddit group, there was a blogger who contacted us. And, this highlighted sentence right here says it best. There's this game called Cosmic Conquest. Many people claim it's one of the very first real-time simulation games, but nobody seems to have actually played it. And it's basically a chain of people quoting each other saying that it's the first RTS. So, there's no screenshots of the game. Nobody has actually run the game in probably 30 years. And yet, for some reason, there's this group of historians that seem to keep saying, oh, yeah, Cosmic Conquest, that was the first real-time strategy game. So how could that be? If nobody's actually gotten the game to run and there's no screenshots of it except for a single page in Byte magazine, is the thing a hoax? So he reached out to us and he said, I'm trying to get it to run on GeForce. This person was not a programmer. So he reached out to us, and that's kind of where the story started. And so after that, I decided, you know what, I'm going to go on to Internet Archive and I'm going to start typing this thing out. And I'm just going to put it up on r/Forth, and maybe somebody will help me. And I was, very surprised because a lot of people showed up, I think, and it was a great group effort that the community just kind of self-organized itself, which I think is one of the best things about the Forth programming language is the community around it. And so I created 2 versions with the help of these users. And aside from these 2 versions, there have been a couple people in the community who have continued to create derivatives of the work. So the first version is what I would call the classic version. And I wanted to make no changes whatsoever. It's just me taking the pages, typing them in, and I just put it up on GitHub. And then the modernized version, maybe I'll call it the 40th anniversary edition. That version was modernized to work on GeForce. And then since then, other folks have done things like it's been ported to the TI-99. And I believe there's one other derivative work floating around. So yeah, the magic of the internet. So let's go ahead and do a demo really quick. I've got my terminal open here, and it's been a while since I've played this game, so I'm going to actually pull up the README. That's the great thing about documentation is you write it yourself, and then months later when you forget what you were doing, you can look back at your documentation. So yeah, so the game is actually pretty simple. You just hit enter. It's got a random number generator that's based on keyboard input. So you see there, let me make this a little bit larger though. Let me see if I can do that. Yeah, so you enter some keys and we can take a look at the source code later, but basically those keys kind of act as a pseudo number generator, and then it'll be initializing. And to be quite honest, it's not by 2022 standards, it's not the most interesting game, maybe, but it is the history of it certainly is. Oh, and it looks like it had an issue here. So let me start over. So you type Conquest to get started. Okay, so here's that random number generator I spoke about. Yeah, Alan Sartori Angus is the original author here. And then we're going to play a short game. And so it's case sensitive. I think on the Apple II, can everybody see that little P character? That's supposed to be a spaceship. And you can go around and, if I wanted to land on this planet, I'll type L. And for which direction, I'm going to put east. And it says, okay, no planet there. Whoops, I made a little mistake. But that's kind of, for an early 80s video game for the Apple II, it's pretty simplistic. But yeah, my main interest was less about video games and more about just learning the history. So let's get back into the slide now that we've all seen it. So yeah, so the source code, and we can take a look around here in a moment, but the source code is all up here on GitHub. I've tried my best to keep the documentation up to date, and so yeah, the modern version is available here, and this will run on most versions of GForth. There have been some folks on the Reddit group who have, maybe said that the style could have been a little bit better on this one, but this is kind of close to the original. And then if you want the true original for like historical archiving, I did the work of just typing this out from the different pages of the Byte magazine, and it's a pretty fun source code base to just poke through, especially if you weren't writing Forth in the early 80s, such as myself. I like to be able to see into the past and know about the history. So yeah, if anybody, that I'm going to put that as a side note. If anybody does look at this and they look at the original version and something comes to mind and they think they know what Forth system this was supposed to run on, please let me know by, like I said, emailing me or raising an issue on the GitHub repo. And so, yeah, so lessons learned, interesting facts. The most interesting thing to me is that, historical fact checks matter. There's a lot of journalists and researchers who have just blindly been saying that this game was one of the first real-time strategies. And if you read the original article about this on zeitgame.net, we find that it certainly contributed to the history of the game genre, but it probably wasn't the first one. And even then, it was a pretty simplistic game compared to other games of the time. And it also taught me a lot about FigForth, because again, I got into programming in the late 90s, early 2000s. So I didn't get a lot of exposure to FigForth prior to this. And it was also interesting that, we members of the Forth community, we are probably the first people to play this in this millennium. It has probably not been played by any other group of people that we are aware of. So it was fun to, come together as a group. And I think that for a novice Forth programmer, if you were looking for a fun code base to try out or to modify so that you can learn Forth, I think this could be a lot more fun than building a to-do list or something like that. So yeah, definitely it was fun, and it was also good from a historical sense that we were able to get some screenshots of the game that haven't surfaced in almost 40 years now. So the unanswered question still is, where is the author? If they are still around, or if any of their peers are still around, I'd love to talk to them. But we don't really know what happened to the author. We have no idea what Forth system it was supposed to run on. Maybe Byte magazine didn't want to mention the Forth system by name for copyright reasons. I'm not really sure. And I'm also curious, maybe there's somebody in this group today who may have been involved with this original project. If they are, I would love to hear more. So yeah, if anybody can provide context, that would be interesting to know. So yeah, thanks everybody. That's kind of what I did with the system. There's some resources there. If you go on my website, you can use that as kind of the entry point to get the other links. Or if you go to my GitHub profile, I have Cosmic Conquest pinned as one of my pinned repositories, so it should be right there on the front page. So yeah, that's was my historical dive into Cosmic Conquest, and yeah, thanks for taking a watch.
Well, great. How inspiring. Thank you very much. Are there any questions to Rick?
Christian has a comment.
Yeah.
Rick, you brought back historical memories. In 1985, I think I built my Apple II clone, and one of my first program to use in there was something called Graphort, or Graphical Fort. So it might be what you were talking about.
That is the one. You are correct. I have suspicions that it was Graphorth. The only reason I say suspicion is because I tried getting Graphorth to run on an emulator, and the version I had would not run Cosmic Conquest. There were some keywords missing. I think it was like VH tab, and there was like one or two words that were not present in Graphorth, but most of the other words were. So that's interesting that you mentioned that.
So I still had my Apple II clone 3 years ago, but I moved and I threw everything away. So I could tell you if I still had it. So thanks for your presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Other questions?
I've got a version of Graphforth. Here's the screenshot or manual.
So
maybe if anybody does have a working Graphforth installation, whether it's via emulation or bare metal, the original version verbatim is on GitHub. I would love to hear if it works for you.
But what were some of the challenges in like porting it? Is it like trying to figure out like words that are not there and what they do and trying to implement that?
Yeah, that was one of the challenges. The other challenge was that I'm under 40. So I think there were a lot of assumptions that you could make in the early 80s because there were certain things that just everybody knew in the Forth community. And so, I think I probably used an Apple II maybe in like kindergarten, and then they kind of went away. So I had to learn a lot about FigForth. Some of the words, most of what I work in nowadays is all ANS Forth or Retro Forth. Prior to this, I never did any FigForth, but it was fun, and I came out of it with a greater respect for FigForth because I did learn some interesting little tidbits there.
My question, and also congratulations for this work, Rick. This is very important for our community to see development of Forth for games or real applications, and not only talking about new Forth implementations, because we talk very much of Forth implementations and very few of real programs. They are very fun. They are very fun for people who loves to program. I think this is very important. You have this repository. It can be adapted to other Forths, so people can run it in their Forths they create. And my question is, what is your next project with Forth? Do you have any?
Well, yeah. So I started. I can share my screen again here. I started restoring a bulletin board system. Let me get out of here and go back to my my GitHub. So before the meetup, we were talking about FPC and some of those mid 80s Forth systems. I started restoring a bulletin board system from the dial-up age that was written in FPC. Unfortunately, and Lars Brinkhoff was a big help, and a couple other Forths and other folks. And actually, the original author, actually found his version in a floppy disk in his garage after I started this. But unfortunately, after reviewing the source code, I don't think it would be safe to run this in modern times. I think security concerns are a little bit different from today in the 80s. So I'm working on that. You know, I think this project's probably going to stay where it is. And then the other thing I'm working on these days is retro Forth. That has been kind of my favorite Forth. And I helped add a dynamic memory allocation this year. That's my recent commit to the project. And haven't had a lot of time for Forth outside of that in the last couple of months.
Well, this is amazing. You are very productive, and you are always invited to participate with us, as I told you in private. And we love to see you presenting. Excellent. Well, it was an excellent presentation.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I would like to add something. Rick, I think I have actually been using, if this is the program called Community.
Yes, it was a derivative of Community.
Okay, yeah, that was the early 80s.
Yeah, I'm a couple of comments on that. Community was run out of my basement. We put a second phone line in for John James, and the telephone directory was Apple Ragsdale. So there was Bill Ragsdale in the phone book, there was Apple Ragsdale. When you dialed in Apple Ragsdale, you got John James Community on an Apple II.
Oh, wow. It is a small world, isn't it? Yeah, I believe.
And also, I wrote the first Forth for Apple II, which was really Fig Forth ported over. And it was then went to John Draper, who then used it to write Easy Writer. So it was kind of the core founding. We took it to Apple and said, would you like to offer this as a language? And they said, where is your instruction book? And we said, oh, well, we thought your people could write the instruction book. And they politely showed us to the door.
Oh, wow. Yeah, it's that's interesting.
In my opinion, I think that the next platform where this game could be revived is Sinclair ZX Spectrum.
Yeah.
That is the same years. In 1982, it was the first issue.